Hi everyone. Good morning. It's time for me to read more searching for dragons. This is what I'm gonna do. This is for D.I.J. Castillo. This is chapter 7, Searching for Dragons, called In Which Wizard Makes a Mess. Oh no. And the journey begins. Ignoring Aunt Terrell, Mendenbar kept his eyes on the nightshade. He had a moment's useless wish that he were in the enchanted forest, where he could have disposed of the monster with relative ease. Here, things were going to be a lot more complicated. He shifted his grip on the sword and pulled at the power within it. The nightshade swung at him, its fully extended claws carving a whistling arc in the air. It was very fast. Mendenbar barely managed to block in time. The force of the blow knocked him to one side, and he almost lost hold of the sword. The nightshade hissed in pain and shook its arm, but Mendenbar knew it was not seriously hurt. Without active magic behind it, the most damage the sword could have inflicted on a nightshade this big was a bruise. Oh, no. Again he pulled at the power in the sword, then had to roll to avoid another swing by the nightshade. This time he kept rolling until he was out of the monster's reach. He came up on one knee and pointed the sword at the nightshade, pushing power through the sword in the pattern he had pictured in his mind. Enteral's staff struck him across the shoulders. The sword flew out of his hands and he went sprawling. His half-formed spell spun wildly in the air and then was sucked away. He heard an angry shriek from Cimmerian, then a shout, "Mendenbar, dodge left, quick!" Without hesitation, Mendenbar threw himself to his left. He heard a rush of wind as the nightshade's claws missed him by inches. There was a splash somewhere behind him, and Antral's voice cried, "No! No! You'll be sorry for this, Cimmerian." The Mendenbar's hand closed on the hilt of his sword. He twisted and brought the sword up, shoving power through it recklessly. The blast of barely formed magic caught the nightshade in mid-leap. The creature hung, frozen in the air for an instant, then dissolved in a cloud of bright sparks. Mendenbar seized the remnants of magic and pulled them together into a tight knot, ready to throw at another nightshade or at Aunt Terrell himself. Only then did he pause to look around. Cimmerian stood a little way away, swinging the empty bucket in one hand and looking at him, as if she were impressed in spite of herself. Aunt Terrell had vanished. "You really do like flashy magic," Cimmerian commented, as Mendenbar climbed warily to his feet. "I haven't seen anything like that since Kazul's coronation party." "Where's Aunt Terrell?" Mendenbar said. Did he get away?" "No," Cimmerian said, waving a free hand at the damp area floor to Mendenbar's right. "I melted him." "Oh, the splash. Duh." "Melted him?" Mendenbar looked at the damp patch more closely. Antarel's soggy robes were plastered to the floor in the middle of a gooey puddle. His staff lay along one side of the robes, half in, half out of the goo. There was no other trace of him. Mendenbar was impressed and said so. It's really not hard," Cimmerian said. "All it takes is a bucket of soapy water with a little lemon juice in it. A friend of mine discovered by accident how to do it, and I've kept a bucket ready ever since, just in case. I thought that only worked on witches." Cimmerian shrugged. "Lots of things don't work the way they're supposed to. Morwen's a witch, but she certainly doesn't melt in a bucket of soapy water." Mendenbar thought of the shining stone step and the spotless wooden floor in Morwen's house and nodded. "I can see that. But why does it work for wizards?" "We don't know." Cimmerian gave him a sidelong look. "I'm sorry I let Antarok wallop you with his staff, but I didn't want to throw the water at him while you were in the way." "Why? Oh, you mean you were afraid it would melt me too?" Mendenbar blinked. "But I'm not a wizard." "You work magic," Cimmerian pointed out, "and I don't know how strict the soapy water and lemon juice trick is about defining wizards. It would cause a lot of trouble if I melted the king of the enchanted forest in the middle of Kazul's living room, even if it isn't permanent." "You mean he'll be back?" Mendenbar had started to put his sword back in its sheath, but he stopped at once. "How soon?" "Well, not for a couple of days, at least," Cimmerian assured him. "Antrel may be Zeminar's son, but he's never been a very good wizard." "Antrel's the son of the head wizard." Mendenbar shot a considering look at the puddle and the piles of soggy robes. "So that's what he meant when he said his father would be pleased." "Probably." Cimmerian frowned pensively at Antrel's staff. "I've got to find Kazul. The Society of Wizards is up to something for sure, and she needs to know right away." "Couldn't Antrel have come here on his own?" Mendenbar asked, although he didn't really believe it himself. Cimmerian shook her head. "I don't think he'd have dared. As I said, he's not a very good wizard. He wouldn't have been able to keep himself concealed from the dragons, and he certainly must have had help to make sure anything as nasty and complex as that construct you took care of." "That wasn't a construct," Mendenbar said. "That was a nightshade. They're fairly common in parts of the enchanted forest. Antrel didn't make it. He just snatched it from somewhere nearby." "Snatched it?" Cimmerian's eyes widened. "Yes, I suppose he could have managed that. I begin to see what you meant about traveling in the enchanted forest alone," she added in a thoughtful tone. "I should hope so," Mendenbar muttered, turning away. "Then you've changed your mind about going?" he added hopefully over his shoulder. "No, just about whether I accept your offer of escort," Cimmerian said. "It'll probably be a nuisance, but nightshades would be much worse." "You're not as bad as a horrifying monster." Slightly startled by this unflattering comparison, Mendenbar glanced back at Cimmerian. There was a decided twinkle in her eyes. Mendenbar smiled and bowed elaborately. Thank you for your kind words, Princess. You're welcome, Your Majesty, Simrine said, curtsying in response. Now we'd better get to work, or we'll never get this mess cleaned up in time to get to the flat-top mountain before dark. Oh, cleaning up the large cave took less time than Mendenbar had expected, despite the unpleasantly gummy look of goo that Andorel had left behind. A large patch of the mess, or part of the mess, turned out to be leftover soapy water, which was very convenient. Simrine mopped most of it up with Andorel's robe, then wrapped the robe around the staff and started toward the rear of the cave. What are you going to do with that? Mendenbar asked curiously. That's actually a good question. Can he do wizard stuff if she has the staff? Hide it, Simrine said. There's not much else he can do to a wizard's staff. They won't break, and even dragon fire won't burn them. I know because we tried everything we could think of the last time we melted some wizards. We? Morwen and I? Andorel will get it back eventually, of course, but hiding it will slow him down a little. She left to dispose of the staff while Mendenbar scraped up the last of the goo. The kitchen was another matter. Simrine insisted on doing all of the dishes that had been waiting for the sink to get unplugged, which took a while. Mendenbar offered to use his magic on the dishes, but Simrine politely declined. A magic sword that does plumbing is unusual, but very useful, she explained as she filled the sink. A magic sword that does dishes is just plain silly. Besides, there have been 2 big flares of magic in this cave in the past hour already. If there's a third one, someone might come up to see what I'm up to. I didn't notice anything remarkable when Andorel brought the nightshade in, Mendenbar said, frowning, though I'll admit I overdid it a little when I got rid of the thing. I was in a hurry. Yes, of course, said Simrine, setting a clean plate on the drain board. But you weren't in a hurry when you unclogged the sink, were you? That was the other flare I meant, not Andorel's fiddling. What was conspicuous about that? Mendenbar asked defensively. He picked up a clean towel and began drying plates. For the record, she has the king of the enchanted forest doing dishes with her. It was a perfectly ordinary spell. Simrine looked at him. Right, just like that sword is a perfectly ordinary magic sword. Well, I wouldn't call it ordinary exactly, but that's because it's linked with the enchanted forest, Mendenbar said. Outside of that, it's nothing special. Nothing special. Simrine stopped washing dishes for a moment to stare at him. Suddenly she frowned. You mean it? You really haven't noticed. Notice what? The way that sword of yours positively reeks of magic, Simrine said. We're going to have to do something about it unless you want the Society of Wizards to be able to find us with their eyes closed. Mendenbar looked at her. She was perfectly serious. He set the dish towel down and drew his sword. It didn't look or feel any different to him from the way it normally felt, but Simrine winced. Can't you tone it down a little? I still don't know what you're talking about, Mendenbar said, irritated. And even if I did, I wouldn't have the slightest idea about how to go toning it down. Why not? It's your sword, isn't it? It didn't come with directions. Most of them don't. Simrine shook her head at him and picked another dirty teacup out of the rapidly diminishing stack. Maybe there's something in Kazul's treasury that will take care of it. I'll check as soon as we're done here. When the dishes were finished and the kitchen tidied to suit Simrine's exacting standards, she left Mendenbar to mull things over while she went off to investigate the treasury. Mendenbar was glad Mendenbar was glad of the chance to think. What is the Society of Wizards doing? He muttered. Between the misleading things Zeminar had said to Mendenbar and the downright lies Andorel had told to Simrine, it was clear that the Wizards didn't want them comparing notes. Simrine might even be right about their desire to start a war between the Enchanted Forest and the Dragons. Starting a war, however, would take more than a misunderstanding between King of the Enchanted Forest and Kazul's chief cook and librarian. Were the wizards behind the mysterious burned area Mendenbar had found? They could have gotten a hold of Warog's scales, and they certainly could have enchanted them. But why would they do that? Mendenbar asked the sink. They're not stupid, at least Zeminar isn't. And a war would cause the society almost as many problems as it would cause us. What could make them overlook the problems and try to stir up trouble anyway? The sink did not answer. But if it wasn't the wizards, Mendenbar wondered, who was it? Where had Kazul disappeared to? Was it really a Dragon's Bane farm in the Enchanted Forest? Or was it just a rumor someone was spreading to add to the confusion? This is a good mystery. This is even better than the last book. He was still trying to put his questions into some sort of order when Simrine returned. She had exchanged the apron and the rust-colored dress for a dark blue tunic and matching leggings, and a pair of tall black boots and a maroon cloak. She had taken off her crown, and her braids were wound neatly around her slope. Mendenbar could see. Nope. I skipped a page. I was like, wound neatly around her slope. That sounds weird. Neatly around her head. A gold-handled sword swung at her side next to a small belt pouch. She held out a sword belt and sheath of leather gray with age. I think this will do the job, she said. Try it and see. I've already got a sheath, Mendenbar pointed out. Yes, but this one blocks magic, Simrine explained. It will keep your sword from being so obvious all the time. At least, I hope it will. If you say so, Mendenbar replied, taking the scabbard. He held it a moment, testing. It didn't feel magical, but then that was the idea. He shrugged, pulled out his sword, and put it into the sheath Simrine had given him. Oh, that's much better, Simrine said with evident relief. I can hardly notice anything now. I can, Mendenbar said, touching the hilt. With a frown, the pulse of the enchanted force was still there, ready for him to use. Of course you can, Simran said. It's your sword. Well, I suppose I don't mind using it then, Mendenbar said, as long as it doesn't damage the sword. It won't, Simran promised. Mendenbar took off his sword belt and set it aside, then buckled on the belt and scabbard Simran had given him. All right, he said. Let's go. As they left the cave, Simran muttered something under her breath and waved at the entrance. Mendenbar jumped as a coil of strong, hard magic sprang into place behind them. Looking over his shoulder, he saw a wall of solid rock. He transferred his gaze to Simran and raised an eyebrow. What kind of magic was that? Just something Gazul and I worked out a while back, Simran said. It's to keep wizards and knights and so forth from prowling around while I'm gone. So Simran is a sorceress, as well as a cook, and a librarian, and goodness knows what else, Mendenbar thought to himself. Every time he thought he had her figured out, she surprised him again. Oh, I love that line. That's great. It's a good idea. But please warn me if we're going to do anything like that again, he said. I'm not in the mood for being startled, if you know what I mean. Simran nodded, frowning slightly, and asked just what it was about the spell that had startled him. This led to a long technical discussion of the various ways of casting spells, detecting spells, and comparing spells other people had cast. Mendenbar found it both interesting and informative. Mendenbar found he'd always known that his own methods of working magic were not much like anyone else's, but he had never had time to study other styles. Simran knew something about most kinds of magic, and she was naturally very well informed indeed about dragon magic. She was as interested in Mendenbar's system as he was in everything else, and this conversation lasted all the way to Flat Top Mountain. Oh, what's that? She's continually like no ones you've ever met him? The sun had slipped behind the mountains, as it was almost dark when they came to the foot of the last slope. Mendenbar could see the giant's castle at the top, large and dark and ominous against the grey sky. A broad road wrapped 3 times around the mountain as it wound its way to the castle gates. Are you sure this is the right place? He asked. Quite sure, Simran said. I've never been here myself, but Kazula described it often enough, and that's certainly a giant's castle. Exactly, Mendenbar said. But is it the right giant? Well, we won't find out standing here. Come on. Simran marched confidently up the mountain. Shaking his head, Mendenbar followed. By the time they reached the castle gates, the stars were beginning to come out, and it was getting hard to see. There ought to be a bell pull or a knob, Simran said. You check that side of the gate, and I'll take this one. All right, but what? A loud grinding noise interrupted Mendenbar in mid-sentence, and the gate swung open. Yellow light spilled across the road, making Mendenbar and Simran squint. Come in, travelers, a woman's voice said much too pleasantly. Come in and make yourselves comfortable for the night. Neither Mendenbar nor Simran moved. This was your idea in the first place, Mendenbar said softly to Simran. What do we do now? Ask questions, Simran replied just as softly. She raised her voice and said, Thank you for your kind hospitality, but we're not just traveling. We're looking for the giantess Balamor, and we're in a hurry, so if you're not Balamor, we have to go on. I am Balamor, said the voice, still in an artificially pleasant tone that made Mendenbar's skin crawl. Who are you? I'm Princess Simran, chief cook and librarian to Kazul, the king of the dragons, and this is Mendenbar, the king of the enchanted forest, Simran answered. Simran, said the voice in an entirely different manner. Oh, good, I've been wanting to meet you for the longest time. Come in, you and your friend, and I'll have supper ready in a jiffy. Mendenbar and Simran looked at each other. I think it's all right now, Simran said after a moment. Well, we won't find out standing here, Mendenbar said. He held out his arm. Shall we go in, princess? Simran gave him a bright, almost impish smile. She laid her fingertips on his arm as if they were walking into a court ball. I should be pleased to accompany you, your majesty. Together they walked through the gate. The courtyard inside was high, wide, and empty except for 2 rows of blazing torches in the iron holders lined up on either side of the path. Mendenbar and Simran paced slowly up to the door, which swung open just as the gates had, only without grinding. As they went in, they heard the castle gates crunch shut. A moment later, the doors closed silently behind them. They stood in a stone hall 3 times the size of any that Mendenbar had ever seen. A wooden table, surmounted by high-backed chairs, stretched the length of the hall. At the far end of the room, a large fire burned in an open hearth. High on the walls, more torches lit the room. A brown-haired woman in a pale blue dress was bending over a cauldron that hung from an iron hook above the fire. It all looked very ordinary until Mendenbar noticed that the seats of the chairs were level with his eyes, and everything else was similarly oversized. The brown-haired woman sniffed at the cauldron, nodded to herself, and straightened. Welcome, she said, coming forward. I'm Balamor. You must be Princess Simran. I'm so pleased to meet you at last, after all that Kazul has told me about you. The giantess bent over to shake hands gently with Simran. She was at least 3 times as tall as Mendenbar, but she moved with a grace that suited her size. Simran returned the handshake gravely and said, I hope Kazul hasn't given you the wrong idea about me. Oh, God. Okay, well, I'm almost done with the chapter, but I'm also almost to 15 minutes, so I will read the last page or so in another video.